Jeff, welcome. I'm so excited to be doing this with you. Everybody, this is Jeff Chan. He calls himself an industry elder, and I'm not calling him that. That's what he says about himself. So I'm stoked to get this time with him. Did you want to introduce yourself, Jeff? Because I don't feel like I will do it justice.
Terrific, thank you. Just I'm simply Jeff, and I've spent more than 30 years of over 30 years of experience in disability, and also a person with lived experience of disability. I have family members with intellectual disability and psychosocial disability. But me being having a career in disability is not due to them. It's more my passion for disability for a range of reasons, which I will unpack as we have this podcast. I've been so fortunate and privileged to have had two inaugural statutory roles to protect the rights of people with disability who are subject to restraints and seclusion and what we call compulsory treatment orders in Victoria or forensic disability orders in Queensland, and more recently before my current position now as Chief Strategy and Quality Officer at ABC Behaviour Support. I was the Deputy Commissioner at the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission. And yeah, just put simply, I've been very, very fortunate and privileged to have been in that, to have this kind of career history.
Of course. Could you take me back to the start, I guess? Like, what was PBS like before it was PBS as we know it today?
That's right. Well, PBS, when I started, there weren't any PBS per se, in that sense. So my career is in the early 1990s is going to tell you my age. By qualification, I'm a speech pathologist, and by background, before I was born in Singapore and did my education in Singapore, I I was a teacher of the deaf for about 3 years. Then I got a scholarship to study Sydney University to do speech pathology. And in speech pathology, I was just very fortunate to work predominantly in early intervention and also with adults with intellectual and developmental disability. It's not by design or a planned way that I got into PBS in that sense. The only thing that I have been very intentional and deliberate in my career is that I chose to work in geographical regions where there's a high diversity in terms of cultural and linguistic diversity, and also in a regions where there's low socioeconomic status. And that's what I chose. I choose to work in those places because I find that I thrive in those kind of challenges. So as a speech pathologist working, in the early 1990s, I just then part of the, your geographical catchment area, you come across people with at that time have been defined as having problem behavior or aberrant behavior or challenging behavior. And it was just meet with individuals who present with those behaviors that I put on my speech pathology hat on. There are two things I will say I've learned in speech pathology. First, behavior of concern or challenging behavior or problem behavior, these behaviors do not occur in a vacuum.
Mm.
They occur in context. And that's really important because sometimes I think when we support people with behaviors concern, I think we focus on the behaviors, we don't see the behaviors in context. A behavior might occur, for example, in a particular situation or environment or social context, but might not occur in a family environment or vice versa. So as a speech pathologist, I learned very quickly that behaviors of concern do not occur in a vacuum. They occur in context, in environments. The second thing as a speech pathologist, I learned very quickly that behavior is a form of communication. It could be a request, it could be a disagreement, it could signify, opposition. So there are a range of things. And often Also, we tend to focus on the behaviors, the overt behaviors. As a speech pathologist, I think it's really important to, when I talk about behaviors of concern in within a context, it is not just what the person does in terms of the behaviors, but as a speech pathologist, I learn very quickly when I work with people, autistic children and autistic individuals. Observation is an important skill to have as a behavior support practitioner.
Mhm.
You know, observation is important because if you work with non-speaking individuals, every posture, every pose, every slight glance, every facial grimace, every vocalization, it's for us to uncover or discover whether those signals are actually intentionally has a form of communication.
Mm.
And then you want to
Mhm.
also create an opportunity for communication. One of my early examples when I worked with an autistic child, and one of his behaviors is if he walks into a room, he'll start putting his index finger in every little cronies and under the desk, every hole he can find, and and so that was what he would do, his repertoire. And I wanted to learn whether can I get him to be aware that I'm present to somebody else. So
Mm.
I actually followed his behavior. I was next to him as he goes around putting the little finger into every little hole or little crevices in on the windowsill. I would do that. And
You're
after
following him.
I was following him, I would do
Oh
that.
wow. Yeah.
And then I would do a tapping. I would do a tapping and to see whether is he aware, you know. First time, nope, he kept doing that. He was vocalizing and kept doing that. And I tapped louder and I tapped with different rhythm. By the third time, he actually paused and his posture, he paused to slight turn towards me. And I knew he was aware of my presence. And then we
Mm.
started communication from there onwards.
Wow.
So for me, is with non-speaking sort of individuals, you start at their level, and you start from there. So I always assume that there is intentional to communicate.
Hmm.
It is my job to find out what it is and how.
Mm. What it is and how, and it's so powerful if you can lattice on communication just for yes and no.
Yes,
Like that opens up the whole world. That
correct.
allows you to give consent. It allows you to not give consent.
That's
Like
right.
just yes and no. They're really powerful.
Yes, that's right. And it's also to say for me then all behaviors are a form of communication.
Hmm.
Our job is to find out the what, the how, and the why.
Mm.
And sometimes it's also the when. When would that person communicate that form for what reason and the why. One of the books that I have till today always think about and it's a book by Carr and Dunlop and a few authors. It's called Communication Based Intervention for Problem Behavior. It's a 1994 book when it was first issued. It was a textbook that I still use. There are lots of good case studies, and I thought it was for me when I read that book, and with my background in speech pathology, for me it was an epiphany, like the light bulb moment went on, and
Mm.
it reinforced my belief that yeah, actually, hey, I'm not too bad a speech pathologist. It is a communication and how we use communication based intervention. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, wow, that's so interesting. And we see now, like within the PBS field, like from this NDIS context, there are so many different backgrounds that people come to it through.
Yes.
And it's so fun working with a speechy who's now a prac or an OT who's now a prac. And you see
Mm,
the different lenses that people bring to the whole
mm,
art of
that's right.
PBS.
And someone was saying PBS is an art and a science. isn't it? And I think it's a lovely way of summarizing what PBS is. Aaron, I'm also interested to find out, two quick things. Where does Bespoke actually start for you? And
Mm.
to what inspired you to start Bespoke?
Yeah. So Bespoke started because I met my manager at the time, Rika Testai, and I had a similar sort of experience to what you're talking about with that textbook. There was such a light bulb moment of what PBS could be. I had just met somebody who had such strong values and such a strong, I guess, sense of advocacy for the people that she supported. And would you believe we hadn't actually met in person when we started Bespoke? We'd just done a few supervisions just over Teams, and I had this feeling like we have to do something together. This we have to work together. There's some magic here, and that's when we started Bespoke, and it was a horrible process getting audited and getting prepared, and it took a year and a half. And I remember receiving that email saying that we had been registered. I just burst into tears. It was a huge moment for me, and I went to Riker's house, and we were so excited. And we started with just wanting to
Mm,
be quite a boutique, smaller PBS company. And we never did any marketing or anything like that. And we've now grown to, I think, 50-ish clinicians across Australia. And it's really helped me hone in on the way that I think about training and development of new practitioners. And that's why I'm so excited to be doing this with you. I feel like there's just so much knowledge stored with people like you, people like Peter Conway, who we need to tendril into the new practitioners. And it's like, how do the people who were the architects of this system, how do we bring that into the new
mm,
level, the new batch of practitioners? Because we've seen that it's becoming, like, I would say it's still quite nascent within Australia. It's quite a new skill, a new art, and like, how can we get these people who are doing it now to be the best practitioners that they can be? So that's how we think about everything at Bespoke. My thing that I say all the time is that all boats rise with the tide. So I do a
mm,
lot of training for different providers and upskill practitioners, and we've had practitioners go on and start their own companies, and I'm so proud of them. And yeah, the way that I think about PBS is definitely that there's a lot of skill to be developed, and how do we sort of frame that? Because there's no like Speech Pathology Australia or OTA or ASW. There's none of these sort of governing bodies for PBS, so it's a little bit more, I don't know, relaxed potentially. So how do we
mm, mm.
bring people up together through core and then proficient and then into advanced and specialist, and how do we have the best pracs? That's something that we think about a lot at Bespoke, which is pretty cool.
Terrific. That's good to
Mhm.
know.
Mm. I Something that I have come in contact with through your work, because you've published so much content. It's been a real gift to read quite a lot of it, and you can see how PBS has been built through the papers that you've published. It makes me think about the way that you really stand up for people, like structurally at a personal level. How did that all start? Is that just something that you have had sort of inherent within you? I feel like you're such a strong advocate for people.
Yes, so I've been reflecting quite a bit about my career trajectory, and I think there's a fundamental sort of basis on which I respond to when I see, I use the more cliche word, a sense of social justice.
Mm.
And when people ask me this, I always say, "Oh, blame it on the Christian brothers, the LaSalle brothers, who I did my education with in Singapore, that probably instilled in me a sense of social justice. And also, for me, it was also about the fundamental dignity of a person, and that for me, every person matters. So whether you are a person with disability, the family members, the support workers, the practitioners, the team leaders, the managing directors and general managers, we all have a part to play. And I'm very convinced that we all need to play that part. And so I'm very motivated in the sense of social justice. That For me, it's not just we all need to play the part. We all must play the part. Things we have done to people with disability historically and even in the current cultural and social discourse. And so that kind of inherent dignity of a person always stayed with me. The second thing also is that if I see an issue or a problem, that the question I always ask myself, what am I going to do about it?
Hmm.
You know, a simple example is when I was a speech pathology student, and I could see that I've had some really great clinical supervisors in speech pathology, and I've also had some not so great ones. And then my question is, hey, I think we can do this better. So in my fourth year project, it was the first study in the world that looked at stressors of speech pathology students in clinical placements.
Mm.
And then from there I grew, okay, I can do something about it. So I became a clinical educator
Mm.
and supervised students. Uh, when I looked at people with disability who are subject to restraint and seclusion, as a clinician, I'm saying, hey, we can do better. And we need to do better. And we all need to play a part in that. So I was very honored and very privileged when, as the inaugural senior practitioner role in Victoria. So Victoria was the first role statewide, nationally, and internationally. So I came to that role feeling so privileged. It was a tough interview process. There were three interviews, and it was just a sense of privilege. I have been so fortunate to be able to work with a range of people, with people who are my peers or even my seniors, who I would say are very enabling. So when I was an inaugural senior practitioner in Victoria, deputy secretary was, I would call, a very enabling leader. He'll just say, "Here's the goal we want to hit, Jeff. Take us there, and let me know if I need to be, because I don't want to be surprised. you know,
Ah.
here's That's the goal. You take us there." And that was so enabling. And I think that's
Mhm.
really that's why I say we all have a part to play in terms of behavior support, because it's easier to always point a finger at somebody else. And so my question always, my challenge to anybody would be, so what are you going to do about it? What are you going to remediate the situation? How are you going to support the person? And then we all have a part to play, because our part can be the enabling part. You may not
Mm.
have to do it, but you might enable, you might create the possibility, you might create the opportunity for change, for example. The second thing I'll say is, and not everyone agrees with me on this position. For me, every time we use a restrictive practice, it's actually a failure in our support system.
Mhm.
Technically, I know in all my previous roles, senior practitioner, chief practitioner, director of forensic disability, I know I'm the one who talks about authorization processes, but fundamentally for me, every use of a restricted practice is a failure in the support system. The failure in the support system in not understanding the function of the behavior, for example, not providing the or creating the opportunities, not changing the structural issues. Like, as we work in a tough gig, right? We work in an environment where sometimes are reluctant to be part or to come to party to the solution. We work in competing regulatory environments. We work, in addition to the NDI's Quality and Safeguards Commission's regulatory compliance, we also have to work in competing regulatory environments like guardianship, public trustee, police,
Mhm.
mental health orders, you know. So there's a range of things that we work in. And so I talk about, we all have to play a part. So I talk often, when I talk to organizations, I talk about synchronicity. Synchronicity, I guess the best illustration, if you look at in the shoal of fish that moves in the water, and one moves one direction, the school of fish will follow. Same with starlings, right, in the sea, in the sky. And I think that's I'd like to see PBS in that sense. We all need to be synchronized. Now I'm going to use this another analogy. There was a world famous UK couple who do ice skating called Tovel and Dean. Right. Google Towel and Dean, and they're so well known, and the image of them dancing in the skating ring to Ravel's Bolero, for example, that shows that synchronicity, and when they come on stage until they finish the role they play, and sometimes I see PBS in that sense. As soon as we
Mm,
step in, we play the role, and then we must finish it through keeping that role throughout the whole process. And so for me, that is about synchronicity, and synchronicity also applies to other parties. As a practitioner, how does your team leader support you? How does
mhm,
you as a managing director and owner of bespoke behavior support you?
mm,
How do we advocate for a systems change? How do we rally and lobby and move and influence the reluctant environments like the mental health service or a recalcitrant provider, for example?
mhm,
So I talk about synchronicity that way, but fundamentally, I'll always go back to a very strong belief and passion about people's rights. And this is accentuated by my own lived experience when I have witnessed, you know, a family member been physically restrained with bruising on the wrists and on the arms. And I've witnessed, a family member who kind of access mental health services, kind of past first base. And so for me, it's okay, Jeff, that's the problem. What am I going to do about it? Hey, Aaron, I've talked about my kind of speech pathology background. I'm really keen to understand your professional background as a psychotherapist,
mm.
and then how does that play a part in, particularly in terms of your PBS pathway, but more in particular, not just about how does psychotherapy meet your kind of practice standards, but how does that add insight to your work as a PBS practitioner now?
Mm. It's a good question. I'm a little bit less directional with the way that I approach things. So the psychotherapy energy is much more, let's hold hands and explore this together.
Mm,
And it's not so directive. It's not, I'm going to tell you exactly what to do, when to do it, and how to, like if you're a psychologist, how to feel better mentally or something like
mm,
that. Like in psychotherapy, it's a lot more, let's pull these disparate parts together of a narrative into something that really makes sense for you. And then I'll help you work out how you can move through the world in a more confident and more individuated way. That's right in the ballpark of my PBS practice. So the way that I view it is that the sort of the unconscious or the collective sits at the level of the stakeholders and the participant that I'm lucky enough to be supporting. So what's happening for everybody externally, and how can we help the participant sort of individuate through that and
mm,
communicate through that and find meaning through that. So meaning making and existential work is really important to me. So I view finding the function as obviously super important, but I think that finding the meaning as part of that function is really important as well. So if we talk about, let's say, connection seeking behavior, like you could just say that that's the function, but I would want to know why. Like what's happening underneath that? Like
mm,
what is the purpose of that connection? Why do they want that connection? Why now? I think that when you have a function, you can now interrogate that and go deeper, which can
mm,
sometimes be a little bit different to other PBS frameworks, potentially. I think that this is the same for the way that I do my training and my supervision of pracs as well.
mm,
Like I talk a lot about transference and I talk a lot about
mm,
countertransference and I talk about the way that participants make my practitioners feel.
Mm,
as well as the functional, as well as the, all right, we've got 30 days to do this BSP. What are we doing? Like the nuts and bolts. But I think there's
mm,
also this other area that's potentially underexplored
mm,
within PBS, and that sits within this almost existential, quite relational part.
mm. And that's critical, isn't it, to be aware? And often, I kind of agree. Sometimes practitioners, we don't realize when we meet someone or enter into a space or a particular environment, we might come in heightened already,
Hmm.
and then we bring all our biases and prejudices and ourselves, and we don't realize this. That's why I talk a lot about, because I'm a mindfulness practitioner, I talk a lot about knowing myself, and then what I call perspective taking, seeing from the other person's perspective. Because as I used to say to my team where I used to work, remember, we are not an accident and emergency service. So
Hmm.
just pull back, just pause, don't react. And I think we need to learn that, so that we carry a lot of biases, a lot of prejudice. And one of the things I learned when I did my MA honors in linguistics was appreciative inquiry, which is a methodology of a qualitative methodology, that sometimes it's good to go into a situation or a space, or it's tabula rasa, it's a blank slate,
Hmm.
and we have moved away all our bias and prejudice and meet the person, you know, when they're communicating, or that space and time, and we hold that space for that person, you know.
Mm.
And I think that's important. I think psychotherapy has that values, and that, like, you that even self-awareness.
Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. This has been a really nice intro podcast for everybody to get to know us a little bit. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about what's in store. So we're going to be doing a bunch of filming, and the way that I'm thinking about it is when you're talking about these, like the synergies between the different levels of people within PBS. So
Mm.
from the practitioner who's starting tomorrow and they're brand new, all the way through to directors of big companies to policymakers. There is a synergy and a connection that everybody can have in the way that they advocate for people and the way that they
Mm.
frame behavior as
Mm.
communication as well. So we're going to be spending quite a few episodes sort of breaking down different, to be honest, it's mostly different papers that you have written and different thoughts that you've had that I've been reading over the last little while, and how they can be applied to each level of
Mm.
PBS. So I'm really excited for that. And we'll see everybody next time.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.